Uh, One sec. I think my setup's a bit botched. Hang on.
Yeah. Hello. Yeah. So the tone, the tone of this is going to be hostile. Warning you now.
Okay.
I haven't been able to have a conversation with a lot of utilitarians. A lot of either it's difficult to find, or the ones that I'm aware of have been avoiding me. And I would like some answers, and you are in the hot seat because
Cool.
no real reason. Yeah. Yeah. So let's start. So let's start with the definition of utilitarianism. Is there like a massive difference between consequentialism? By the way, is it like the greatest good for the greatest number of people, or the greatest outcomes for the greatest number of people? What would you say it is?
So, I mean, consequentialism is just so okay. You've got utilitarianism, which is a form of consequentialism, right? So, broadly speaking, consequentialism is just any moral system that factors in the consequences, at least as far as my understanding goes. And utilitarianism is a specific consequentialist moral system in which you try to maximize utility, and utility can just be defined as whatever you want. Like it's that's like the absolute highest level version of it. Most utilitarians, me included, have utility as a kind of what's the word? Utility. They use utility synonymously with well-being. So yeah, so it's basically just like maximizing well-being. Whatever generates the most well-being is what a pure utilitarian would kind of like. That'd be their preferred moral outcome, I guess.
And generates the most well-being for who?
Just whatever generates the highest raw number. So it doesn't matter who. Most people would say, like, I don't know anything that could experience well-being. So in my case, I'm a vegan, so I would factor in animals, humans, any sentient like thing having some sort of an experience, anything that can have like a quote-unquote well-being like mental state. So yeah, I think that's what I would say. Yeah.
If you hear the following sentence, "for the greater good," would that fall under? Would that be a utilitarian related sentence?
I mean, like, okay, I possibly, in some contexts, almost definitely. But personally, I don't really like ascribing any kind of like broad phrase or something like that to a particular belief, because something like for the greater good is, it's already quite normatively loaded. What one person defines as good is going to be separate to someone else. So a Christian would consider the greater good to be very different to what a utilitarian would consider, right? So I'm sure some people would use it like that from a utilitarian perspective, but I don't like ascribing any kind of like single phrase to an ideology, I guess.
Okay, and would you say that outside, or let's say expanded from morality, utilitarianism can be found in politics today?
I don't know. I think I would say I think most people, and therefore most politicians and most politics, at least in the countries I'm aware of. So this is obviously going to be fairly limiting, so I don't know about like I don't know Singapore's legal system or like Brazil's legal system particularly well. But in the countries I'm aware of, I would say that I think most people follow some form of vaguely utilitarian principles, even if they wouldn't be able to articulate it necessarily. I think most people believe in the concept of trying to make the world a better place for a broad amount of people, I guess, helping everyone try to succeed in their own lives and be happy. I think most people believe in something along those lines. So I would say yes, but not in any sort of direct way. More in a kind of, I guess, like a roundabout, broad principles way. I guess. Does that make sense?
I mean, to some degree, I think the electorate would expect the politicians to be utilitarian. So, like, that's if the electorate view utilitarianism as the good moral, or as the right moral system, let's say, or the true moral system,
Mhm.
then they would like their representatives to reflect, especially in the case of morality, which is super important in politics. So let's say culture is downstream from politics is downstream from culture, but culture is downstream from morality.
Sure.
So I think to some degree you can expand it to politics, and I would add that in my area of economics, especially modern economics, everything is utilitarian. Like it's the whole modern field of economics is entirely utilitarian, from saying that there's a market failure because it doesn't serve the greatest number of people, doesn't serve the greater good to some degree, to welfare economics. All of these have kind of a utilitarian slant to them.
Yeah, I think a lot of those do, but the only distinction I would make is that it really depends on the electorate you're talking about. So, I mean, you're in the UK as well, right? If I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like I would say that I don't think that I don't think I would say maybe for like Labour that's true, but I definitely don't think that's the case for like UKIP, for example. I think they have very different moral founding.
Sure.
I don't think, yeah,
I can accept that. I'm just saying, like in the field of economics, let's say, anytime anytime that something is, when you have like a chart and you've got like two lines saying supply and demand, and then saying actually this isn't optimal, and to what should it be optimal, then the reason that is given is the utilitarianism, to serve the greatest number of people, or the welfare of the greatest number of people.
sure.
So
I get what you're getting at, and I think that's true to some extent. But I do think with politics, it's almost difficult to know where people come from to some extent, because I also think that like one really good example that where the rhetoric would overlap a ton with the utilitarian, but I don't think it comes from a utilitarian place, is if you look at like populist speakers, they often use a lot of those phrases and try and get the economy, working for the working class or working for everyone in the country, that kind of thing. But I don't know if that, strictly speaking, comes from a utilitarian place. I would almost say, I think actually you could argue that's almost more deontological, in just believing that kind of whatever kind of helps everyone is the most moral, but not strictly speaking trying to maximize well-being. Does that make sense?
I think even in the case of populism, they are trying to maximize utility, or maximize for the greatest number of the greatest good, but for a specific group. So
sure, but that's kind of what I'm saying, right? Like,
Sorry?
if it's for a specific group, then I don't know if you can consider that utilitarianism. Well, I guess you could. Yeah, I mean, yeah, okay, I guess you could.
I think even if you don't consider it, I think you can hack utilitarianism to make it that way.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. No, that's kind of what I was getting at just now. I think if you, I agree. Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I wrote a post on my blog saying utilitarianism is evil. And the reason why I did that is because I study atrocities and why atrocities happen throughout history. So like large atrocities.
Okay.
The usual one: Nazis, Soviet Union, China, Cambodia, the big ones. And I've always been interested to see like what is the root cause that made people act this way. Because even if you take the Nazis, let's say, like, how can you take like a society of people that were civilized, loved poetry, loved philosophy, had like a strong sense of community, and went from A to B, basically? What happened? What were the root causes? And I believe over time I found some of those reasons. And I'm not saying that utilitarianism is the reason. I'm just saying I'm seeing similarities, that things can, like, you can take utilitarianism as the moral foundation and you can hack it to get similar results. There may be like a place where I can say it may not be as bad, but I still like found like a sort of hack to it, and I wrote a post about it. And of course people say I'm very, very, very wrong. Even though they didn't necessarily disagree with what I was saying, they just said what I was saying wasn't. Sorry, what I was saying is true, but it's not problematic as I'm describing it.
Okay.
But let's start at the beginning. So with regards, and this is the context of the conversation. So let's start at the beginning. Utilitarianism, we did the definition, but how do you know that you are doing the greatest good to the greatest number of people? Is it based on a calculus? Is it based on something else? Just bringing it like down to earth. If I want to take a particular action, or if I have an option between 5 different actions, how does utilitarianism guide me in taking the right action?
Okay, so here's what I would say, and honest to God, I don't speak to many utilitarians at all, at least not in a strictly philosophical context. So it's very difficult to know if what I would say is what everyone would say. But I would say there's a big distinction here between two different things, and that's the difference between a kind of like philosophical ideal and a practicable application of those ideals. So when it comes to something like utilitarianism, I can say that I believe, after digging through different moral systems and all of that kind of stuff, that I think this particular moral system is the best one. But every moral system is going to have flaws, and the big flaw of utilitarianism, in my opinion, is that essentially there is really no way to accurately calculate util. You basically have to go off of things like self-reported happiness, and things like self-reported well-being, essentially, because the issue is that we're trying to measure something that is inherently experiential, and because we can't ever experience anything outside of our own minds, it's going to be impossible to measure that in any kind of objective sense. And that's just 100%, that is an issue of utilitarianism. I don't know if you can ever solve that. Maybe at some unbelievably distant point in the future, maybe. But personally, I don't think it'll ever be solved. So what I would say is that basically you can never like truly know the util of a certain outcome, but you can use certain proxies for that. So say you enact a policy on a certain country and you want to measure it in a utilitarian sense, you want to measure like the utils. You could do some kind of like study in which you measure well-being, or stated happiness amongst the populace before and after the policy was implemented, for example. And try and control for other reasons that why someone's happiness or well-being could change that are separate to the policy, right? So that's what I would say. I would say that essentially that is a flaw, but I think that utilitarianism is still the best moral system. So it's the ideal we should strive for, but practically we can never do true utilitarian calculus. I believe that's essentially impossible.
So how we know something is difficult to know because it's based on intuition or feeling or experience. Mm-hmm. And when we try to do the greatest good for the greatest number of people, again, it's difficult to know, but we kind of try our best, or we take the average, or we take the 20% that does 80% of the difference, and things of that nature to then go in a particular direction. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to know if something is good or bad, because someone can have, like, one person can have a good reaction to one thing, and another person may have a bad reaction to the same thing. Is that fair to say? Like so it depends on. It's very individualistic.
I mean, that is true, but in reference to what, I don't understand what you mean by that.
I'm just trying to ground it in reality, in a sense. So let's say, how do I know something is true? I look at the world, I observe it, I get information about it, and then I process it in my head using reason, and then I say, this is a fact, this is true, and I can rely on it to a certain degree. Like if I use a scientific method, for example, I can get a higher certainty of that it is true. And here, for example, we just say, well, it depends on the feeling you have inside of you, and that is the true for this type of morality.
Yeah.
And what is the difference between that or like a religious person saying, I believe that something is true because I have a feeling that it is right?
I mean, fundamentally there isn't going to be a difference, but that's going to be true for every human and every system, right?
So to some degree, like utilitarianism has, I think feeling is the core. We're not trying to get anything more accurate to that. That's good enough, and we're just going to proceed with trying to make people as happy as possible, as many people as happy or well off as possible.
Yeah, I think what I would say to be more specific is we would try to maximize well-being, and well-being defined by positive mental state, which is going to be something that can only be measured by self-reporting. So yeah, but yeah, essentially.
Okay, and if I get a positive mental state when I achieve a value, would it then be the case that helping me achieve that value would be what utilitarian would aim for? So if I want to get food and I have a shortage of food,
mm-hmm.
and I can't obtain this food any other way, and utilitarianism will come in and give me this food, will help me. Sorry, someone will help me get some food, and therefore that person has done some good.
Yeah.
So charity, just like vanilla charity in a sense.
Yeah, vanilla charity is one way to. Yeah, but that would be one example for sure.
Okay. What if me helping someone else has a detrimental effect on me, but in the larger scale, it has an overall effect on more people than just me?
So,
what are the limits? What are the limits of helping or utilitarianism?
So I don't think there are any limits typically. So what I would say is essentially if you I think I know where you're going with this, and yeah, basically, a utilitarian would say it would be more moral to generate more well-being. So essentially, making your life incredibly miserable to maximize the well-being of a ton of other people. If that overall increases well-being, then it would be a moral thing to do. If it overall decreases well-being, so your suffering outweighs the well-being you're generating, then it would be a immoral thing to do. That would be the calculus.
Isn't there some sort of limit that says if it's uncomfortable, then you can stop, or just like as much? It depends on the circumstances.
It depends on what we're talking about, right? In terms of just like a raw moral system, there is going to be no limit, right? But in terms of actually applying this to a society, it's there's going to be limits and whatnot put in place simply because an individual can't so this is just my belief, I guess. I don't think an individual can actually produce that much well-being to counteract the immense suffering they'll place upon themselves if they were to essentially do that. I think that generating.
Let me just see if I understood this. So if you're saying me going into a huge amount of suffering won't generate that much well-being anyway, so I'm no use past a certain point, and that certain point means I can function normally plus do all these activities to help other people, but no more than that, because then it has diminishing effects.
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Okay, so it depends on but if for example I in particular like the more I help other people, the more they absolutely get help, then I should help them as much as possible, no matter like how much health it costs me or wealth it costs me, something like that.
I wouldn't quite phrase it like that. What I would essentially say is if you're the way this basically so this is another kind of like interesting thing with utilitarianism that I've thought about a lot, and I don't know if there's a good answer for this. Basically, what you're talking about is a utilitarian would say whatever generates the most well-being is the most moral outcome. However, generating half that well-being is still going to be a positive moral outcome. It's just it's half as moral as going, as generating the most, right? By generating half, you're generating half the morality, essentially. The question then becomes do we have a moral obligation to generate the most well-being, or do we only have a moral obligation to lead a moral life? And I think that's something that is pretty hard to answer, honestly. And it's something that I don't have a good answer for. But I don't think that's an issue of utilitarianism, strictly speaking, because I think that even if you were to say, okay, maybe we shouldn't be obligated to generate the most well-being because it's going to come at great cost to ourselves. If we can generate half the well-being with only a small cost to ourselves, then we should only be obligated to generate half. Then, that just kind of will lead to a better world or whatever, or it's better for the everyone involved in the society. I think all of these answers make sense. I think even some people saying kind of like, no, you should be more obligated to generate the most. I think even that answer can make sense, even though I don't think it's the one I would give. But either way, I think there's different answers to this question, and I don't know if I have a particularly good one or particularly satisfying one, to be honest, because I think it's a pretty hard question to answer. But yeah, essentially, you're talking about the obligation we should have. Should we ought to generate the most well-being? It is a question within utilitarianism that's kind of separate to the moral system itself, I guess.
From an individualist point of view, what does following utilitarianism benefit me?
From an individualist perspective, how does utilitarianism benefit you?
Yes.
So,
for example, you're asking me to do all these things for other people. Is there some expectation that doing these things for other people will help me, or is it just no? Like this is just you should just do these things because it's the moral thing to do.
I would say honestly a bit of both, because from like if we just talk about like today, for example, I don't know how much you would get like in return essentially. So if you ought to do the moral thing just because it is the moral thing to do, right? But I think most people would agree with that. So like you don't get anything from, I don't know, I'm trying to think of something that's like you don't get anything from going out into the night and like not physically assaulting somebody dramatically, right? But I think most people would still say morally you ought not to go out and physically assault people, right? It's still a moral standard we would have. So
sure, but I can make the argument that physically assaulting someone else would hurt me because I would then go to jail.
Okay, so the argument I would say in response to that is I think actually in terms of going out into the night and physically assaulting somebody, because it's a relatively minor crime in the grand scheme of things, I actually think you could get away with that incredibly easily. In fact, I know a bunch of people who have been physically assaulted on their way home. When I was back at uni, one of my friends got assaulted just by it was a random hit and run, and then nothing ever came of it because it's very difficult to actually follow up on crimes like that. So the odds of you getting caught are actually incredibly unlikely. So if you're just a big,
I don't know about that, but it is okay. So let's say there's a risk of me getting imprisoned and losing my freedom.
Mm-hmm.
So there's there's a risk of long-term damage to my life. Like I'll have a criminal record, it'll be hard to find jobs, I'll go to prison for a while, I'll meet bad people, I could not make it out of prison. I don't know to what degree, but it has a lot of personal negative consequences that it's not worthwhile me engaging in it.
I think that's only true if you get caught. And here's what I would I'd be curious to look up. Sorry, pardon me. I'm just drinking a fizzy drink, so I'm burping a lot. I would be curious to look up how many physical assaults on average actually get, like what percent get reported and what percent of people actually get convicted. I reckon it would be fairly low, if I had to guess.
If that was the case, then I think that this is the reason for government. Like if people are getting stabbed or attacked like at night and the police can't do anything, then it's a dysfunctional government. But
okay,
in general, like it shouldn't really happen.
Sure, I agree with that. But either way, I think we're getting slightly off topic because the reason I brought this up is because it was because we were talking about in utilitarianism, what's my reason to do the moral actions? So we're in this context. I don't think we need to consider government. So let's actually just let's just say you could physically assault someone and get away with it 100%. You just know that. I think most people would still say morally you ought not to do it because it's a bad thing to do. You should have some moral compulsion to not physically assault somebody, and that's kind of what I would say in regards to utilitarianism, right? It's not about getting something out of it. It would be more about just if you are a utilitarian, you should be morally compelled to increase well-being. Basically, is the argument I'm making. Oh,
So I shouldn't physically assault someone else because it reduces well-being for other people.
yeah.
I mean, from an individual's point of view, I can make two claims now. I can say it's not worth. I can just add the word long term, the words long term, and the situation, and I can find a justification for not doing it. Like I'll have long term damage from this. I can get injured myself, and
Sure, but
and the reality is there is the police, so that could be like some more reasons. But I can also do the opposite. I can say, well, if someone physically assaults my wife, I would physically assault them back. Like if we're both getting mugged or something, I would physically assault them back, and that would be justified, despite it lowering the utility.
So it wouldn't necessarily lower the utility, right? If it was justified, because so two things. Firstly, I think you're missing my point just slightly. So you mentioned a bunch of stuff about, if you physically assault someone, it's going to have a bunch of negative things on you. You might get injured, all that kind of stuff. But just to illustrate the point I'm making, I could say just remove all of that. So you're not going to get injured. You're not going to get caught by the police. If you remove everything, even if it was to slightly benefit you in some way, I think most people would still say that you ought not to physically assault someone. It's just a moral compulsion you should have. And in terms of self-defense, if you're getting mugged, it actually wouldn't, strictly speaking, it wouldn't, strictly speaking, be negative util to not defend yourself. Because if, let's say, you're in a situation where you're getting mugged and somebody comes and starts attacking you, if you were to just do nothing, not attack them back, you're going to get, in all likelihood, way, way more injured than if you had defended yourself. So there's a massive negative well-being there that has to be taken into consideration. And if you were to defend yourself, there is you're going to be able to protect yourself essentially. And to some extent, I think you can argue that if somebody is taking an action that is aggressive and is going to inflict negative utility on someone, then the person has a right to defend themselves essentially. So I think there's a bunch of different angles you could take it, but even just choosing not to attack them back, that wouldn't, strictly speaking, maximize utility. In fact, actually defending yourself probably would maximize utility, because you have to consider your own well-being, right? It does get factored in at the end of the day.
Okay, and what if I said that this person is attacking me they're coming to attack me with a knife, but I have a gun. Now I can take the gun out and I can threaten the person and then basically scare them off, or I can just shoot them, and I can make the claim that it would be more beneficial to society if I prevent this happening both for myself and from other people in the future.
So you're saying that it would be more moral to shoot them as opposed to just scare them off, right?
For the greater good.
So this is how you would kind of maths this out, I guess. If we're talking about like a scientific vacuum and we can measure every variable.
Okay, I have a problem. I have a little bit of a problem with the scientific vacuum scenario, because I do feel that when we need to kind of interact with reality to see what is more. Like if we have these sanitized situations where we remove all these elements from reality, it makes it like unreal to some point. But just having said that, continue.
So I mean, do you want me to respond to that, or do you want me to go on into what I was saying? Because I do have a response for that.
Go ahead and respond to it then.
Okay, cool. So I would say that this kind of goes back to what I said at the very start when we was talking about utilitarianism and how you do the measurements. So in philosophy, I think there's a really important distinction between what is kind of like your philosophical ideals and what is actually practical. So of course, when we can never take a moral vacuum and actually kind of and actually do this in real life. It's never going to be that clean. There's always going to be unexpected variables, externalities, all that kind of stuff. However, I think it is useful to kind of talk about things and hypotheticals in a vacuum, because if you know your ideals, then you know what the best solution, that's best outcome is, and then you should always strive for that best solution. So when you apply it to a practical setting, you know what your ideal is, and you can move like in the best way towards that, even though there's going to be externalities that you're going to have to consider that may alter the formula in some way. But yeah, I would say that if, in fact, I would actually say the opposite. I think trying to consider everything at once actually muddies the waters in terms of working out in terms of moral clarity, basically. Because if you're trying to factor everything all at once, you're never going to be able to understand your fundamental principles in as best way as you can, in my opinion.
Okay, but in general, like removing the police from a hypothetical is already unrealistic. I'm not saying there could be a rock on the floor and you could stumble on it. I'm just saying the police being there, that's like fundamental to most places. Maybe some countries don't have it, but I would say the majority of countries do.
Okay, sure. But the reason I brought that up is because, so like I was trying to illustrate that you can do things that people would consider immoral, even if they have no negative consequence to yourself. So once we factor in the police, obviously we know that no one would just do this randomly. Well, actually, it does happen occasionally, but it's very unusual for someone to do that just randomly, right? But that, exploring the territory where you don't have the police gets you kind of a better picture of what a person may say towards this moral problem, as is. And then you can kind of go from there, right?
And let's say, for example, we don't have the police, but you attack someone, and that someone's uncle is now looking for you for like months on end. He's looking at cameras, asking everyone if they have any recordings of the area. He has like all these violent men that he tells them what to do, and he's looking for you for like ages. And so it's either there's some deterrent in society, either by the government or by the people themselves, that if you harm someone, there can be consequences to doing so. You can't say in a sterile vacuum, I can harm anyone I want without any consequences.
I agree, but we're talking about moral principles, and the point I'm making is that when discussing moral principles, I think it muddies the water to add in all those variables just because you're not going to get at the root of the issue. So I'm trying to think of a good analogy for this, but it would be like if you give someone the instructions to bake a cake, you're never going. It would be really bizarre to give them the instructions with kind of notes for every potential thing that could go wrong. So like if someone drops hydrochloric acid into your cake mixture, this is the next step you should do. Having all of those steps laid out would be nonsensical. You just give them the cake instructions, and then the idea is that anything that goes wrong, the person should be able to adapt and change what they're doing in accordance to their situation. But the best recipe for a cake is always just going to be the pure instructions, start to finish, with no fluff, right? And I think it's kind of similar here.
Well, okay, I think we should move off this topic, but I do think that like things like the trolley problem and things like the morality to some degree, like if we have a reality based morality and we say we do these things because of that's the best way to reality, then I think like at the very least large elements that reality can give you feedback if you take certain actions are relevant. But let's move off the topic. So what did you wanna say apart from this?
So the reason we went into this is because you asked what utilitarianism would do for you. And okay, I could answer this. I'll answer the second part. So essentially, the first part was, should I be morally compelled to act in a utilitarian way? And that's kind of what led us down that route. Then the second part is, what can utilitarianism do for you? So I strongly believe that a world in which people adopt utilitarianism and go out of their way to help other people would benefit everybody, because you are a person, you have an experience, and your well-being matters as well. So in a world in which everyone follows utilitarian principles, sure, there's no direct, obvious, like, you get this benefit from it. Everyone would have everyone else's interests in their own mind. So it's a world in which everybody would, in a way, look after each other. And I think that is a pretty big benefit to a utilitarian outlook on the world, and that's something that it could do for you essentially.
Okay, let's take a different way. Let's say we have a world full of virtue ethicists,
Mhm.
and they're all like trying to improve themselves. Like everyone is trying to be the best version of themselves in a society.
Mhm.
And would you say, again, from an individualist point of view, would you say that that society could be good?
Uh, yeah, I almost definitely. Yeah, I don't see why not.
Another example, let's say everyone in society is Christian and very religious. Would you say that society could be good?
It so it depends on what you mean by good to some extent, I guess.
You decide.
Um, okay, sure. So, I mean, from my perspective, I would say it's kind of in parts, yes, but there's definitely going to be some huge drawbacks. So, I think that if you take it depends what kind of Christianity we're talking about to some extent, but if we take like a very traditional view on things, then I would say that LGBT rights, for example, are going to be something that's going to be scaled back. I think women are going to have more rigid roles, and in fact, well, gender roles in general are going to be more rigid. And I would say that there's going to be a lot of people under that would have a want to do something outside of their traditional gender roles. That wouldn't be able to enact that. So, like for those people, it wouldn't be. I don't think it would be good. No. But at the same time, there are going to be a lot of people that practice Christianity who strongly believe in all of the practices under it. That it would be very good for them. So, overall, it could be good. It probably has in the past. We have probably have had Christian societies that have been like relatively, functional and well, probably very functional actually. But it wouldn't necessarily work for every individual in that society. I don't think. No. So it kind of depends what you mean by good to some extent. But I would say overall, kind of. But for everybody, no, absolutely not.
Okay, so let's say there's a minority of people that it won't benefit as much as the rest of society, yeah?
Mhm.
Is there a minority of people in utilitarian, if all of society was utilitarian, that would also not benefit as much as everyone else?
Um, I mean, potentially, I would say only if you found a group of people in which. So, like, if you're talking about a pure utilitarian system, which isn't what I necessarily agree with, but if you're talking about a pure utilitarian system, then yeah, if there's a minority of people in which more well-being can be generated by fucking them over rather than working with them, then that minority would be screwed over. Yeah.
Okay, but it's like understood that that's the payment for living in such a society, yeah?
No, I don't think so. Not necessarily. Again, it depends slightly on what type of utilitarian you are. So, in a raw utilitarian society, then yes. But if you live under, say, a rule utilitarian society, then I would say no. Because I guess everything would try to be, pardon me, everything would try to be balanced across everybody rather than, sorry, pardon me, rather than having these kind of sections where you can get a benefit by screwing over a certain minority, right? So yeah, it depends on the type of utilitarian society you would kind of advocate for.
Okay, and so we said rule and act utilitarianism. So in rule utilitarianism, would there be more rights and principles that would govern society, and those would reduce minorities being affected?
Um, Sorry, could you just repeat that?
So in rule
Mhm.
utilitarianism, would there be more individual rights in law and principles in law that would make sure that these minorities would not be screwed over?
I think in yeah, I think in most rule utilitarian societies, you'd probably want something like this in place. But I think you'd have to define the minority to some extent. So, I think the most obvious example that people go to all the time, in a huge kind of like distinction between rule and raw, would be if you take the minority of people getting like the common example is okay, in a utilitarian society, would it be moral to like essentially kidnap somebody and harvest their organs to save 10 people? That's like a very, very common thing that's given.
Oh, I see.
And
Okay.
Yeah, to protect that minority, there's a couple things you can do. So the first answer, the raw utilitarian, would just say, "Yep, that's moral, do it." But the rule utilitarian would say, on a societal level, if everybody knows that they can be kidnapped at any point to have their organs harvested to be given to save a bunch of other people, essentially, that would generate more negative well-being because everybody would be aware of it, and it would create, everyone would be upset at that practice, essentially. So for better societal outcomes, you can put a rule in place that this isn't allowed, even if it would generate more utility on a local level. If that does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that my understanding of rule utilitarianism is you have these principles or rights to people, and the utilitarian element is which principle or which right is the top. It's like the does the most.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, which principle generates the most utility? Yeah,
and I think that obviously because these principles and rights would by definition have a more long-term effect, more long-term view on things. So I think that including an act utilitarian, you may have a more short-term view on these things. Like there's 5 people
yeah,
who need the thing, and so on and so forth. But yeah, so I think I understand that. I do have one problem with making decisions about which action to take, or what do you get the information about which action is the best one to take, and this is where I feel that people can do unethical things, so or even like unknowingly to themselves. But if, for example, we say that we want to do the most good for the most number of people, like it's difficult to know these things yourself. So
yeah.
sometimes it is the case you default on asking experts or leaders to tell you what is the thing that will cause the most good for the most number of people. And I think that in this particular element, I'm not saying that this is right or wrong to do, but I'm just saying in this particular element, the side effect of doing this is that you're outsourcing your thinking to someone else. Now, to some degree, like you can make the claim that we do need experts for certain things, we're not experts in everything. But there is a way to objectively decide if this information is good or not. However, people who don't take this extra step of evaluating this information, just saying, "Oh, these are trusted sources," just allow people to feed them information which they then will take action on. So to some degree, these are like programs or drones where an expert says this is the best thing we should be doing to help people, and then like all these drones are like nodding their head, I agree. They'll either do it or they'll tell the politician to do it. But this is kind of the effect, like they've outsourced their thinking to someone else. I'm not saying like it's in all cases, but it's certainly back to like in the issue of atrocities, which I'm more sensitive to. I do notice like this could be an issue.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I would agree. I mean, obviously, so I strongly believe that we should follow expert opinion for sure. But I obviously that's going to have its pitfalls, and 100% like following thought leaders and not doing any kind of independent thinking on your own or across a populace is going to lead to poor decisions being made, and then if there isn't room to question those decisions, then obviously that could lead to all sorts of horrific things. So yeah, I completely agree. But I don't think this is something that I don't know if I would say this comes from utilitarian thinking. Personally, I think this is more. I think this is more just kind of a. Honestly, I would say this is probably got more to do with just trying to run large society in general. Because having a large society that is going to work for all of the people in it is something that's going to be incredibly difficult to do. And I think that's actually probably more the reason why you kind of get these get power conglomerated to or like concentrated in certain thought leaders, because the idea is they should be able to solve it for everybody. But yeah, I don't think that's unique to utilitarian thinking. I think anything that puts a lot of power in the hands of a small collection of people that need to work it out for everybody is going to have the same problems.
So democracy.
Yeah.
Can we have societies that will work for everyone?
Um.
And what does working for means?
Well, when I say work for everyone, I mean I just mean generally kind of everyone is content with their lives. They're able to like they're able to live relatively happy lives, achieve most of the things they want to do. Yeah, I would say that's what I mean by work for everyone, where you don't have any like a society in which you don't have any like major problems. So something like people dying of starvation or people not like people being homeless, things like that. I would say those kind of problems are if none of those problems exist, then I would say you probably have a society that works for everyone, assuming everyone isn't living in like absolute abject poverty, but they're technically like surviving, if that makes sense.
So the bare minimum must be provided for society to work for everyone.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
Okay. With going slightly back to the expert opinion, it seems to me, and please tell me if you think I'm wrong, that we have two kinds of ways of getting knowledge within utilitarianism. We have feelings based or intuition based, and then we also have intersubjectivism, where we have a group of people observing reality and telling us this is a truth. Like if we have inequality, economic inequality or income inequality, then it is bad for our society. And like 1,000 people or 10,000 people tell you this. And because just of the sheer numbers of people and they're all looking at reality, there's some kind of weight to them, to so many people observing the same thing. And therefore we have two mechanisms of getting knowledge. Would you agree or disagree?
I've never heard that distinction before, but that sounds like a distinction that could exist.
Because if we're using experts to some degree, like we're following this methodology, it's not the case that one person observes something and will accept it.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And to some degree, like a lot of the debates in utilitarianism, like you'll have like some sort of well, let's just say if you come up to like a deontologist, you'll have some sort of weak grounding from a utilitarian side saying it feels good, but then you have all this hardcore data on the back end of it saying this proves my point. So like we should do this because it feels right, which is somewhat not very well grounded if you understand what I mean. But then we have tons and tons and tons of data saying why this is the right thing to do.
Sure.
Or this specific course of action is the right thing to fix the problem that doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
I sense agreement here.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. The thing is that I guess what I would say is like I think all moral positions to some extent boil down to because it feels good, right?
Not my one. No. Mine is different, and I don't think.
Sure. I don't know if you want to get into that here, actually. But
I don't think we have time to go into mine one. But no, mine is not. Mine has more. Anyway, it's a long explanation.
Fair enough.
It's not based on feelings and it's not based on revelation. You do use emotions in it, but the emotions are like on the back end of it. So, for example, if I made the decision that I want to, I don't know, lose weight, and it's good for my life, and it seems very practical, but it is to some degree like a moral action because it benefits me. So it's a moral action to take. And if I lose weight and if I succeed, then I will feel happy after I achieved this thing I wanted to achieve, and or obtained a certain value. And then I will be happy. But the first part is obtaining the value, and the emotion is on the back end of it. Or the emotions can guide you if you're on the right track. So if, for example, I want to lose weight, but then I ate an ice cream, then I will feel bad after having eaten the ice cream because I'm off track. Sure. But
I understand. I don't think that there is. I think that's actually very similar to utilitarianism, to be honest. Because a utilitarian would say that technically we aren't doing what feels good; we are doing what generates the most utility. But obviously, I like this, that. I think both that and doing whatever is best for yourself boil down to I'm doing this because it feels good. Essentially, like generating the most utility for the most people is an objective thing that you could theoretically measure, but people have that as a moral principle because it feels good. And I believe the same would be true of your system.
Yeah, so I said I can't disentangle the happiness element from it. Like obviously I'm not trying to suffer and I'm trying to, stay happy. And you can say it's an objective fact. You observe all humans, then all humans want to be happy. That's what they strive for.
Mhm.
And what does it mean to be happy? Well, that could mean different things from different people, but you could say it's objectively true that everyone wants to be happy. Giving the option of being happy or not being happy. But I think that how we become happy, that has to be determined by rationality and reason and in reality. Like we are integrated with reality and we cannot avoid that. And fighting that would obviously cause us not to be happy. And we have the ability of thinking long term. So we would want things that makes us happy in the long term or content, or even if you take like the basic Aristotelian notion of eudaimonia, where you just want to be content and happy. That I think is a good way, with a little bit of baggage, to explain what I'm talking about.
No, I actually think I get what you're saying quite a lot, and I don't think a utilitarian would, strictly speaking, disagree with this. In fact, so I've got a friend who I talk to a lot about, philosophical things, kind of various hypotheticals. I talk with him a ton, and we both essentially follow utilitarianism. But one of the things he has always argued is that, like one of the traps that I guess you can fall into as a utilitarian is chasing well-being on a short-term level. And I think that the argument he's always made is that actually, even if something feels good for you in the short term, if it's bad for you in the long run, it's something that we can't really consider utility. So he would actually take the stance of something like eating fast food would actually be immoral because it's something that's going to have bad negative outcomes for you in the long term and decrease your well-being in the long run. So that's something that he would argue that I think actually kind of I could kind of relate to what you're saying right now. I don't know if that's quite what you're getting at, but if it is, just let me know.
Yeah, I think what he's saying is right, but I just would take it like as your whole life should be through your lens. I think that to some degree, like if you say my life, so to some degree, like you only have one life and you should live it. So I don't think there'll be another life after me, or I don't think that after I die, that I have a spirit that will go somewhere. This is it, and I better make the best use of it.
Yeah.
And I think to some degree, like if I am required to, this is a strong word, but just bear with me, if I'm required to be a sacrificial animal to other people, that can have a negative effect on my one and only life. And I'm sure you're going to say that's not what the intention was, and so on and so. But just from my point of view, if it doesn't have a long term positive effect on my life, and I think to some degree, in general, like there's a spectrum of individualism and collectivism, and you could say utilitarian falls like slightly in the middle, leaning towards collectivism, but there's still some individualist elements in it. Where I would fall like heavily on the individualist side. And I think that the atrocities that were committed in the past, back to the original point, I think they were heavily on the collectivist side. That's why I have an allergic reaction to when I run across these things. I would say lastly on this actual point, and we touched on it at the beginning of the conversation, was that utilitarians in general, the one I see, and bear in mind I'm coming from an economic background, the limit of the group of people is the state. I haven't seen a utilitarian make a case for a worldwide thing. So obviously there are people who practice effective altruism and they'll send money to Africa because that's the best use of money. But in terms of like the people I run into, utilitarians I run into, they'll be like, we need these national policies so we can help X people. It's never like we need send more foreign aid, or the way the developed countries are like 20. I'm just throwing a number, like 23% of the global population, and the other 77% are. Is it 77%? Yes.
I'm not aware of these stats, but that sounds about right, honestly. Yeah.
The other 77% are like really really poor, and because we're all utilitarian and all humans are the same, we should send all our money or all our welfare to these other countries. I haven't seen a utilitarian make that case ever. Maybe an effective altruism person would, but typically I haven't seen that case being made. So it does seem to me that is the confines typically of utilitarianism. And I think that even like if you and I, we include sentient beings or animals into this group, I think we're kind of manipulating the formula to some degree because we feel that it's the right thing to do. We feel that it's connected, but equally you can take a UKIP person and say they feel that white British Christians are the only group that they should be concerned about. And anyone outside that group, the out group, if you hurt them, if you cause them any damage, that's, they don't deserve, the same level of morality. They're not the people we're looking out for. So I think the scope of the group of people, and even animals or not animals, I think that can be, enlarged or shrunk by how it feels to you, if it feels right to enlarge it or it feels right to shrink it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for sure.
You're supposed to fight back at this point. Say, no, this isn't what utilitarian means. It's written in the scripture.
No, I'm not going to argue against people that use utilitarianism and kind of like, decide what groups they want to factor into util, because at the end of the day, like, utilitarianism is just a framework. How you use it is kind of up to you. So yeah, there's going to be utilitarians that I heavily disagree with, without a shadow of a doubt, and there's going to be some that I agree with more than others. Like, it's interesting that you bring up the point about wealthier countries sending money to poorer countries, because again, this is I don't know if I have a bit of a unique perspective on this, because I've spoken so much to this one friend, because this is actually an argument he would make. You said you've never heard it before, but he's like a lifelong friend, and he's the one utilitarian I know really well that does make that case. So yeah, I don't know. My experience seems to be very different to yours when it comes to dealing with utilitarians. So yeah, I mean, yeah, there's going to be people that use it to exclude certain groups. Oh, sorry, go on.
Let me clarify. The utilitarians I usually deal with, and maybe I'm defining it wrong, but I'll usually like consequentialists, like vanilla, SOCDEMs, kind of economics people.
Yeah, honest to God. So this is just my opinion. I can't, justify this. I've never asked anyone in that camp this question, but I would honestly say that I do think, and I strongly believe this, a lot of those people, especially when it comes to people falling into political ideologies, I think a lot of those people don't actually have any underlying moral principles, and their moral principle is more or less the political end goal rather than something like utilitarianism as a guiding principle. So if you would speak to a SOCDEM, they may do a lot of things that appear utilitarian, but they're doing them because they believe in socialism or democracy or whatever. Well, no. I think it's because they believe in the high-level political prescription rather than the fundamental philosophical idea. So yeah, I don't know if those people necessarily would be utilitarians, even if they say they are. I think a lot of people misunderstand it. And a lot of people kind of use it in a way to justify something like socialism or democracy, rather than looking at whether it is actually justified by going from the philosophical principle forwards. Does that make sense?
Not exactly, but let's see if I can clarify it, because I've got some experience with these people myself. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe these aren't utilitarians at all, but they say they're consequentialists, and as far as I know, that means a form of utilitarianism. But basically, let's look at it this way, right? Let's say charity versus government welfare.
Yeah.
So let's say if I were to do the most good for the most people, I would take let's say 1 or 2% of my monthly salary, and I would give it to charity. Okay, not unheard of, at least back in the day when I studied these things. But these people, these consequentialists would say that this doesn't help at all. This is like a drop in the bucket. The best way to help these people is to vote really hard.
Yeah, I mean that sounds kind of like a ridiculous position to hold, to be honest.
But that sounds, you know what I mean, right?
Yeah, I know the exact kind of people you mean, but I think those people are suffering from like a lot of, I don't know, almost ideological brain rot. And I don't know if I would trust anything they say, but
I
yeah,
can
go on.
I can tell you the justification if you want.
Yeah, no, I understand the justification. At least from what I've heard, it's usually because um, essentially, charity is a bad system, and by contributing towards a bad system, you're never going to have the better outcomes later down the line because you're upholding charity, which is in and of itself a poor system to work with. It's never going to uplift the class of people it aspires to help. Whereas if you vote in a socialist like government, though that is a systematic change that can actually help the people it strives to help. Thus, charity is useless. That's usually the argument I hear. I don't know if that's the same, but go ahead.
Yeah, so it is what you're saying, but the short version is solidarity before charity.
Okay, sure, yeah. But yeah, I think I would say that I think that's a terrible argument. I think it's really dumb, but yeah, that's just me, I guess.
Yeah, so it just seems like we've given up. It seems like we've given up on all these ethical things like helping other people, giving to charity, volunteering your time, you know, for a variety of different things, either like going to a soup kitchen or I don't know, coding a website for a particular charity and all that, or even let's say I am a consultant and on a few times I helped some charities and I didn't charge for my services. One was a Welsh children's charity and one was something in Uganda for doing medicine, like
Sure.
how to collect the data for all the different medical trials and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fantastic thing to do. You're never going to get me to, I'm never going to agree with those people that think charity is useless. I think that's a moronic position, to be honest.
It just seems today that like with this position that they take, that improving society necessarily means how you vote, and it just puts a lot of extra weight on it. And now it becomes like a matter of life and death. Like if you don't vote for this party, then LGBTQ people will die in the street, die in the street, and all these people will be terrible. And then on the other side, they have their own like groups of people that will die in the street, and they need protection. It just seems like everyone's fighting for their own identity groups, and which groups the government should give resources to.
Here's what I'll say about this. I know exactly what you're talking about, and I see it a lot as well. But my honest opinion, and I know you're going to disagree with this, and that's like totally fine. But I would honestly say that I don't believe that those people are a good representation of utilitarianism. I think the vast majority of those people are basically just like they'll say they're utilitarian because it's what their in-group says, or because it's broadly what they believe. Their political ideology kind of aspire, or like what it aligns with the most. But I would say for those people, it almost always stems first from the political ideology rather than the underlying principle. And for that reason, I'm going to have a ton of disagreement with those types of people for sure.
I've seen a lot of people like in the debating world use utilitarianism like very loosely.
Yeah,
like I've seen someone.
Do, yeah.
I've seen someone say, "I'm a truth utilitarian. I'm a liberty utilitarian," and then it's just basically, just like they'll say these things, but it's basically like the vanilla. Either I'm a SOCDEM or a socialist. Like it's always political related to politics. It's not like I'm going to act in a particular way. It's always what policies I want to vote for, what government I want to vote for.
Yeah, no, exactly. 100%. I see it a lot as well, and it's honestly really annoying. But yeah.
So do you think like utilitarianism that was founded in the UK is like there's like a residue of it, but the core element is no longer there?
I don't know about the UK in terms of something that fundamental. Yeah, I'm not sure because, like I said, I mean, we definitely have kind of along the same lines as the US. I guess we have a bit of we've moved towards a more populist sort of narrative recently with things like Brexit and Jeremy Corbyn as well would be the leftist populist. I would say that I don't know if that, strictly speaking, to me, suggests a move towards utilitarianism. I think that's more of just like a high level political thing, and I honestly don't know what the people voting for those people would believe on a fundamental level. So I don't know. It would be a really hard question to answer.
Would you say that people nowadays spend a lot of time in politics instead of morality or doing like moral things?
100%. Yeah, absolutely. I think I wouldn't even just say people in politics. I think that people in general. I think, in my opinion, philosophy is one of those things where like it's something that everybody has to do all of the time, even if they're not aware of it. And the fact that people don't like your average person doesn't study philosophy, I think, is actually a bit of a shame, really, because like I said, it's one of the things like maths, or language that you have to do throughout your life. But people don't really have any kind of like don't really know much about it because it's not a particularly hard studied subject, at least on a wide scale. And I think that's a real shame. So yeah, I would agree with that for sure. But I wouldn't limit it to politics. I would say it's pretty true for everyone.
Yeah, it just seems like politics today is like a very aggressive blood sport.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, I guess I'll let you go because it's been over an hour.
Yeah, I was about to say I should probably bounce.
Okay, well, thank you for your time.
No worries.
Did you find the conversation interesting at all, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was mostly you prying my ideas, and I always enjoy talking about this stuff, so I enjoyed it. But yeah, I'd be curious to know more about your own. But I was surprised at how non-hostile it was after you said it was going to be hostile.
I'm pissed off. I'm upset. It's like maybe I'm dealing with Americans and not British people, because with British people you get a bit of tea, right? And you sit down and you have a chat. With Americans, like, oh my god, you're so wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not me.
Yeah.
Okay.
In general, like you are kind of aware that utilitarianism can have limitations, can be misused, isn't really practiced the way you would like it to be at the moment.
Yep.
Okay.
I mean, what do you have many thoughts on the answers I've given, or?
Well, I've thought about it. So the position that I was taking that utilitarianism is evil, and the points that I've raised, to me, it's still a concern. Can you be like a moral person and a utilitarian? I mean, I hope so. Hopefully. It just but in terms of like it being true, it doesn't fall under that category for me, because of the feeling element.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. I can understand. For sure, it's all I can understand that for sure.
I don't think you're a bad person or anything.
Sure, I'm glad to know that. I appreciate it.